I'm over here talking to you as this Hulu series has come up about the Happy Face Killer. Can you talk about your dealings with him?
Towards the end of my career, and I think it was 1995, I retired a couple years later. I get a call from the Clark County Sheriff's Office, and they say they have a subject in jail in Clark County, and that subject has been arrested for murdering his girlfriend, a woman named Julianne Winningstead. And the Clark County detectives tell me that says he killed a woman named Tanya Bennett in Multnomah County. And Tanya Bennett had been killed several years earlier. I knew nothing about that case. At the time of Tanya's murder, I was working narcotics, and it was a busy city, and I was unaware of that murder. So I go to the Clark County Sheriff's Office. The guy's in, Keith Hunter Jesperson's in jail. And at this point in my career, I've interviewed hundreds of people in jail, and 80% of the time you can't believe a word they've got to say. And particularly if they want to be informants, because they're trying to cut a deal to get out of jail. But this guy wasn't particularly, he knew he wasn't getting out of jail because he was in jail for a murder that he hadn't been convicted on yet, but he knew he was going to get convicted. And he starts telling me he's killed a woman named Tanya Bennett, and he understands we got 2 people in prison. I didn't know anything about the case. And then he ultimately, as we talk, he ultimately implies that he's killed another 7 or 8 people. I go back to the district attorney's office. I find out who investigated that homicide. It was the Oregon State Police and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office that investigated Tanya Bennett's death. I go back to the office, learn all that. I contact the number 2 guy in the district attorney's office, a guy named John Bradley, who was a super ethical, decent human being. I said, John, there's a possibility we got the wrong people in prison on this case. John ultimately calls the 2 prosecutors who prosecuted that case, and they come into the office, and not in my presence, but they come in and they tell John, we got the right people in prison. And I tell John, and now I've got the elected DA involved in this discussion at some point. And I say, I don't know if he killed Tanya Bennett or not, but I think we need to find out. So my partner Jim McNally, myself, and a deputy DA named Jim McIntyre, we start working on this, trying to determine if there's a possibility that Keith Hunter Jesperson had killed Tanya Bennett. We worked on it for 2 months, and I prepared a 15-page report for the district attorney's office saying, I don't think we have enough to charge him with murder, in spite of the fact that I believed he probably did it. But there was one last thing I said we need to do. We need to take him out of jail, and we need to go out to the crime scene, see if he can pinpoint the crime scene. The crime scene was the Columbia River Gorge, which is very rugged basalt cliffs and fir trees and waterfalls, and a lot of it looks very much the same. It's a windy highway out there, and there's not many distinctive spots. It very similar looking territory. We take him out there. He says, well, I think it was this little ravine here, but I'm not sure. We look, and pretty soon he said, it might be back up the road a little ways. And we go back up the road, and he says, yeah, I think this is it. Well, he did pick the right spot. But we had also had the woman who got convicted who had gone to that spot and said, this is where the body was dumped of Tanya Bennett.
And can you give a little bit of background? Because I think that's really fascinating how you get to 2 people sitting in jail and then...
Yeah, we'll get back to that in just a second. But
Okay.
So I'm baffled because I still don't have enough to charge this guy. So I said, well, let me ask you, and by this time, Keith Hunter Jesperson thinks I'm a wonderful guy, and he has told me that he wants to go on a tour where he and I can teach people how not to get murdered. And I didn't really think that was a good idea, so we never really carried that out. But I said, after this murder, did you take anything away from this scene? He said, yeah, I went down to the Sandy River. It was about a mile and a half from where we were standing, 2 miles. He said, I threw her billfold and some other items that belonged to Tanya Bennett. So we take him down there. I said, where'd you throw those items taken from Tanya? Because he didn't want to get caught with anything that might belong to her. He said, right here, and he points to about an acre and a half of blackberries that are 12 feet high. So my partner, Jim McNally, and I talk about this, and what are we going to do? I mean, we got a quarter of an acre or a half an acre of blackberries. And this crime was several years old at this point. Ultimately, we get the Explorer Scouts out. They go out day one, and they denude the blackberries. They don't find anything. And I thought, well, it's not there. Jim says, my partner said, let's send him out one more time. We got to buy a bunch more pop, and we got to buy a bunch more donuts for these Explorer Scouts. They're out there looking the last time they're going to look, and we find Tanya Bennett's Oregon identification card in perfect condition. It was a laminated card produced by the state of Oregon. There's her photograph. There's, I think, as I recall, there was a unique pen that wrote in different colors. And so now we know that we're talking to the killer because we had previously discussed with the people that went to prison about possible finding any evidence that would be helpful, and we came up with nothing. We take Keith Hunter Jesperson for a ride, and he points us to where her billfold, I think it was, thrown, and there's her driver's license. At this point, I've written a 15-page report headed for the district attorney saying, I don't think we have enough to convict anybody on this case. Anybody new. That changed it all, and Keith Hunter Jesperson pled guilty shortly thereafter, and ultimately admitted to several more murders in Florida and in California, Oregon, and one of the really interesting ones. He was a truck driver, long haul truck driver, and so he met a lot of probably unsavory women in truck stops, and he picked one of them up, had sex with her, and then he decided he didn't like her anymore. So he ends up driving into Wyoming out of California. Being the fact that he was a truck driver, he had a pretty unique memory of mileposts, which truck drivers, that's their world, involves milepost numbers. He said, I dumped her body in milepost such and such on highway such and such. So I get a hold of the Wyoming, probably the state police. I said, go to milepost such and such and see if you can find a dead body out there. It was out in the middle of nowhere. The body had been there a long time. It was badly decomposed, but there was a tattoo, I think it was on a shin or something, where there wasn't a lot of flesh, and there was a very unique tattoo that was seen on that body, which would clearly identify this victim. But he was probably responsible for probably a total of 8 homicides. I didn't investigate those thoroughly because the county wasn't paying me to investigate crimes all over Florida, California, Washington, Oregon. But he was an interesting guy in the sense that he came across as a big dumb farm boy, and I don't mean to demean farm boys because that's my background. But he didn't have any tattoo on him. He didn't swear. He was 6'4" or 5", probably, big guy, but the last guy you would expect to be a serial killer, and he was a serial killer. The people that were in prison for that case, the woman had a boyfriend that was a drunk, an alcoholic, and she was trying to get him out of her life. She originally called a parole officer and said, my boyfriend, John Sosnowski, I think might have been involved in this Tanya Bennett homicide. So the detectives that were working at that time, and I wasn't, I was working narcotics, they start interviewing this John Sosnowski and to see if what he knows about a homicide. And he's probably a serious alcoholic, and there was probably blackouts in his life that he was genuinely unfamiliar with. But there's never enough to arrest him, and ultimately, his girlfriend, who was 10 years older than he was, she starts planning evidence to try and implicate him in a homicide. And one of the things that she did, they lived together. One of the things that she did is she wrote a note. As I recall, it said, T. Bennett, good peace. And she planted that in some of his personal effects. Well, at one point, the cops go out and do a search warrant on the place. They find that. There was a search warrant done on this woman's house, and when you do a search warrant, you leave a detailed list of what you take, and sometimes you say what you're looking for in a search warrant. I think probably in that search warrant they were looking for the fly out of a pair of jeans that had been cut out of the victim's clothing. This woman cuts a fly out of one of her granddaughter's jeans, and she plants it. So now the police are looking to charge her boyfriend, John Sosnowski, but they really don't have enough to charge him, and they're looking really hard because they're getting these little tidbits, but none of it's really making a lot of sense. And John doesn't, he says, initially he says, I didn't have nothing to do with that. And at some point he said, well, I'm not even sure, because he had such an alcoholic problem. So they take this woman out, Laverne Pavlinak's her name. The police take her for a ride. They take her out to the Columbia Gorge, and there had been a lot of media coverage about this homicide, and I think one of the pieces of media coverage, which is very difficult in homicide investigations when this stuff gets leaked, was the body was dumped X number of yards from a well-known structure in the Columbia Gorge. They take Laverne Pavlinak out there, these two detectives, and she ultimately points to a spot where this body had been dumped. So now the police think, well, this is weird. I mean, she's pinpointed the spot where this body was dumped. But they still don't really have enough. I mean, John Sosnowski's not admitting anything. They have no physical evidence to tie anybody to the crime. Laverne Pavlinak calls the detectives one day and says, okay, guys, it's showtime. They go back to her house, and now she says, I was there, and I participated in Tanya's death. And she describes how they drive out to a well-known landmark in the Columbia Gorge. John gets her out of the car. It's in the middle of January, so it was all highly improbable scenario, but takes her out and rapes her, and then she says that she helped tie a ligature around this woman's neck and kill her. Well, they take her home. The detectives take her home, and they get a hold of the district attorney that's been handling the case, the deputy DA. They said, Laverne just confessed to a homicide. The DA said, where is she? Well, we took her home. The DA is not very happy. He says, if someone confessed to a homicide, you got to put them in jail. These guys they're a little uncomfortable because Laverne looks like everybody's grandmother. So they didn't put her in jail, but at the request of the deputy DA, they go arrest her and throw her butt in jail, and they go arrest John Sosnowski and throw him in jail. Now, back to Keith Hunter Jesperson, we got two people in prison. I don't have enough physical evidence to charge Jesperson with anything in that case. We go do some serious looking through a lot of Blackberries, and we find Tanya Bennett's driver's license. Actually, it was an Oregon State ID card. So now we have enough to charge Keith Hunter Jesperson. And ultimately, he pled guilty, and he's in the Oregon State Penitentiary for life, pending time in other penitentiaries throughout the country. But That's where Keith Hunter Jessamine will spend the rest of his life, is in the Oregon State Pen in Salem.
Why did Keith come forward in the first place?
He didn't come forward intentionally because he got arrested for killing his girlfriend. His girlfriend lived in Clark County or Skamania County, and he killed her, and ultimately he was in his truck and he gets arrested, and I think it was in Arizona, by the Clark County Sheriff's Office. He wasn't coming forward to tell anybody, but when he gets arrested for killing Julianne Winningstead, he realizes that he's going to go to prison for life. So the reason, he tells me, the reason that he decided to talk about the Tonya Bennett case was the fact that he started feeling bad because people went to prison for something he did. I don't believe that in a heart for a minute. I believe Keith Hunter Jesperson loved the attention, and he continues to court any kind of attention he can get. And there's been a number of publications and productions about him, and I don't think he ever had a guilt complex about the wrong people being imprisoned, which was terrible, but he likes the publicity, as evidenced by the fact that he and I to go around doing tours teaching people how not to get murdered, but he loved the attention. I interviewed him probably 4 or 5 times. He loved to talk to me.
Give me a sense of him, though. Yeah, I talked to Gil Correa, who handled the Night Stalker case, who basically said the guy was evil. I mean, you just look at him. And I've talked to other people who have dealt with serial killers, and they said the same thing. I don't get that impression from this guy.
There was nothing evil emanating from this guy. I've interviewed thousands of convicts, bad people, and if someone introduced me to Keith Hunter Jesperson tomorrow, and I had never met him before, I think it seems like a pretty nice guy. You know, I mean, he's not covered with offensive prison tattoos. I don't think I ever heard him swear. So he was an enigma for sure.